Chapter 1. Arya sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the long driveway that cut through the Harrington estate. The sprawling garden below was beautiful, full of roses and manicured hedges, but her thoughts were far from the scenery. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her fingers tracing random patterns as her mind spun. Lucas was coming home. It had been 4 years. 4 long years since she'd last seen him. Back then, she had been a shy, awkward 14-year-old who didn't quite fit into the polished, perfect Harrington family. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She'd grown, matured, even if only a little. She wasn't sure if Lucas would notice, or if he even cared. Her heart thudded painfully as she thought of him. She shouldn't feel this way, she knew that. Lucas was her adoptive brother, and it was wrong to think about him the way she did. But she couldn't help it. There had always been something about him. The way he moved, the way he spoke, it was like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders but never let anyone see it. Except maybe her. At least, that's what she liked to believe. She glanced at her reflection in the glass. Her brown hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her green eyes were wide with nervous anticipation. Would he notice how much she changed? Would he see her as more than just the little girl he'd left behind? The sound of a car pulling up snapped her out of her thoughts. Her breath caught as she jumped up, peeking out the window. There it was, a sleek black car coming to a smooth stop at the front steps. Her pulse quickened as the driver opened the door, and Lucas stepped out. He looked different. Older. His broad shoulders filled out the tailored suit he wore, and his movements were precise and confident as he adjusted the cufflinks on his shirt. The boy she remembered had turned into a man, and the sight of him made her stomach flutter. She felt rooted to the spot, her hands clutching the window ledge as he greeted their adoptive parents. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but her gaze was locked on Lucas. His voice, deep and even, carried faintly through the open window, sending shivers down her spine. Then he looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything else faded away. His expression didn't change, calm, unreadable, but his gaze lingered just a second too long before he turned back to their parents. Arya felt her cheeks heat up, and she stepped away from the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Dinner was a quiet, formal affair, as always. Arya sat across from Lucas at the long dining table, trying not to fidget under his presence. He was polite and answered questions about university and work, but there was a distance in his tone that made her chest ache. She wanted to ask him how he'd been, to hear him say something, anything, just for her. But she stayed quiet, poking at her food as the conversation flowed around her. At one point, she reached for the breadbasket at the same time as Lucas. Their hands brushed, and she froze. His fingers were warm, firm, and the brief contact sent a jolt through her entire body. She quickly pulled her hand back, murmuring an apology, but he didn't respond. His jaw tightened slightly, and he returned to his meal without looking at her. Arya's stomach twisted. Did he even care that she was there? Had he thought about her at all in the last 4 years? She tried to shake off the thoughts, but they clung to her like shadows. The rest of dinner passed in a blur, and by the time dessert was served, she couldn't take it anymore. The library was her favorite place in the mansion. It was quiet, peaceful, and filled with the comforting scent of old books. Arya ran her fingers along the spines as she wandered through the shelves, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She stopped in front of one of the tall bookcases and spotted a title she hadn't read yet. It was on the top shelf, just out of reach. Grabbing the nearby ladder, she climbed up carefully, balancing herself as she stretched for the book. Her thoughts were still on Lucas, on the way he'd looked at her, the way he hadn't looked at her. She sighed, shifting her weight to grab the book, when her foot slipped. The world tilted, and a gasp escaped her lips as she lost her balance. Before she could hit the ground, strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her back against a solid chest. Her heart was pounding, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she realized who had caught her. Lucas. Be careful, he said, his voice low and steady, but there was a sharpness to it that made her shiver. She looked up at him, their faces mere inches apart. His dark eyes were intense, searching hers for something she couldn't name. Her hands clung to his shoulders as she tried to steady herself, but the heat of his body against hers made it impossible to think straight. I'm sorry, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond right away. His gaze dropped briefly to her lips, and for a fleeting moment, she thought he might lean closer. But then he stepped back, letting her go so suddenly that she almost stumbled. Be more careful next time, he said curtly, turning away before she could say anything. Arya stood there, frozen, her chest heaving as she watched him leave. Her knees felt weak, and she leaned against the bookshelf for support, her mind racing. Had she imagined the way he'd looked at her? The way his hands had lingered just a moment too long? In his room, Lucas poured himself a glass of whiskey, his jaw clenched as he stared out the window. He shouldn't have gone to the library. He shouldn't have been anywhere near her. But when he'd heard the sound of her falling, instinct had taken over. Holding her in his arms, feeling the warmth of her body against his, it had been too much. She wasn't the little girl he remembered. She was different. And that terrified him. He took a long sip of his drink, willing himself to forget the way she'd looked at him, the way she'd felt in his arms. She was his sister. Not by blood, but it didn't matter. He had no right to think about her like that. But as he stared out into the darkness, he couldn't shake the memory of her wide, frightened eyes or the way her lips had parted when she looked up at him. He cursed under his breath, setting the glass down with a sharp clink. In the library, Arya sat on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. Her heart was still racing, her mind replaying the moment over and over. She shouldn't feel this way. She knew that. But the memory of his touch, his voice, his eyes, it was burned into her. And she knew, deep down, that she couldn't stop herself from wanting more. Chapter 2. The Grand Harrington mansion was alive with music and chatter as Arya stood at the top of the staircase, her hands nervously clutching the sides of her dress. Tonight was her 18th birthday, and the celebration was far grander than anything she could have imagined. The hall below was filled with elegantly dressed guests, laughing and sipping from crystal glasses as a live band played soft music in the corner. She adjusted the flowing fabric of her dress, a pale blue gown that hugged her figure and made her feel almost grown up. Her heart pounded as she spotted Lucas standing near the bar, talking with a small group of guests. He was impossibly handsome, his sharp suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders. She caught herself staring, willing him to look up, to notice her. Finally, he did. Their eyes met, and her breath caught. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his gaze, recognition, maybe even admiration. But just as quickly, his expression turned cold, and he looked away, returning to his conversation. Arya's chest tightened, her excitement replaced by a sharp sting of disappointment. She took a deep breath and descended the staircase, feeling the weight of curious eyes on her. People whispered, complimenting her beauty, but none of it mattered. The only person she wanted to impress had already dismissed her without a second thought. The party buzzed around her, but Arya felt out of place. Lucas moved through the room effortlessly, shaking hands and smiling at their guests like the perfect Harrington heir. She tried to approach him once, her heart racing as she reached his side. "Lucas," she said softly. He turned, his expression polite but distant. "Arya," he said in a clipped tone. "Enjoying the party?" Yes, she said, hesitating. "It's beautiful." "Good." His response was curt, and he turned away, excusing himself to greet another guest. The coldness in his voice made her stomach drop. She watched him walk away, her chest tightening as tears threatened to surface. Why was he acting like this? The night before, she had felt something shift between them, something unspoken but undeniable. And now, he was treating her like she didn't even matter. Unable to bear the overwhelming emotions, Arya slipped out of the party and into the garden. The cool night air brushed against her skin as she wrapped her arms around herself. The garden was quiet, the soft glow of lanterns illuminating the roses and neatly trimmed hedges. She walked along the stone path, her heels clicking softly against the ground, until she reached a small stone bench beneath a canopy of vines. She sat down, letting out a shaky breath. Tears pricked her eyes as she replayed the evening in her mind, Lucas's indifference, his dismissive tone, the way he hadn't even looked at her for more than a second. She hated how much it hurt, hated herself for caring so much. Running away from your own party? The deep voice startled her, and she looked up to see Lucas standing a few feet away. His tall frame was backlit by the lanterns, casting shadows across his face. He stepped closer, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his tone sharp. "You're the guest of honor, and you've disappeared." Arya stood, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why do you care? You've barely said 2 words to me all night." Lucas's jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You've been cold and distant since the moment you arrived. What did I do to make you hate me so much?" "I don't hate you," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less tense. "You're imagining things." "No, I'm not," she said, stepping closer to him. Her hands trembled as she balled them into fists at her sides. "I see the way you look at me, Lucas. And then you act like I don't exist. It's cruel." Lucas didn't respond right away. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, the tension between them was almost unbearable. He took a step closer, his voice low and strained. "You don't understand, Arya." "Then make me understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. The space between them disappeared in an instant. Lucas's hands gripped her arms, his touch firm but careful. Before she could process what was happening, his lips crashed against hers. The kiss was desperate, rough, and full of unspoken emotions. Arya froze for a moment, shocked, but then she melted into him, her hands clutching the front of his shirt as she kissed him back. The world around them seemed to fade. The soft hum of the party in the distance, the cool night air, the faint scent of roses, all of it disappeared. All she could feel was Lucas. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer, and her body responded instinctively, fitting perfectly against him. When he finally pulled back, his breathing was uneven, and his eyes burned with an intensity that made her heart race. "This is wrong," he muttered, but even as he said the words, his hands didn't leave her waist. "Then why did you do it?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he kissed her again, softer this time but no less intense. His hand slid up her back, holding her as if he was afraid to let go. Arya's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as the kiss deepened. The garden wall pressed against her back as Lucas leaned into her, his lips trailing down her jaw to her neck. She gasped softly, her hands clutching his shoulders as he buried his face against her skin. His breath was warm, sending shivers down her spine as his lips moved gently, reverently. "Arya," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't." But he didn't stop. His hands moved along her sides, his touch both tender and possessive. She felt the conflict in him, the way he wanted to pull away but couldn't. And she didn't want him to. "Please don't stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her words seemed to break something in him. He kissed her again, his lips capturing hers with a desperation that made her knees weak. Her hands roamed over his chest, memorizing the feel of him, the strength in his body. Lucas's lips moved against hers with a passion that felt both dangerous and irresistible. His hand slid down her sides, steadying her as he pressed closer, leaving no space between them. Arya felt her heart hammering in her chest, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. This was the moment she had dreamed of, and though she knew it was wrong, she didn't care. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Arya," he whispered, his voice rough, almost pained. "We shouldn't." Her fingers trailed up his chest, stopping at the collar of his shirt. "I don't care," she whispered back, her voice trembling but determined. "I've wanted this. I've wanted you." His control finally snapped. He kissed her again, this time deeper, hungrier, his hands framing her face as if she might disappear. Arya's legs felt weak as Lucas guided her gently toward the soft grass by the wall. The world outside the garden faded away entirely, leaving only the two of them wrapped in the intensity of their forbidden desire. Lucas lay beside her afterward, the night sky above them scattered with stars. Arya's head rested against his chest, her fingers lightly tracing the buttons of his shirt. She felt a strange mix of happiness and guilt, happiness because she had finally felt what it was like to be close to Lucas, but guilt because of the truth they couldn't ignore. Lucas hadn't said much since it happened. His arm rested around her shoulders, but he seemed distant, his brow furrowed as he stared into the night. Arya turned her face toward him, studying his profile. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "I shouldn't have let this happen." Her chest tightened. "Do you regret it?" His silence was deafening. After a long moment, he finally said, "It doesn't matter what I feel, Arya. It can't happen again." Her heart sank. She pushed herself up slightly, searching his face for some sign of hope, but all she saw was conflict. "Why can't it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We're not really." "Don't," Lucas interrupted sharply, sitting up and running a hand through his hair. "Don't say it. You know how this looks. To everyone else, you're my sister. But we're not." "It doesn't matter," he snapped, his tone colder than she'd ever heard it. "It doesn't change anything." Arya pulled the blanket tighter around herself, feeling the sting of his words. She wanted to argue, to tell him how much she cared for him, but she could see the walls going back up, shutting her out. "I should go back inside," Lucas said, standing and straightening his shirt. "You should too." "Lucas, wait." He shook his head, avoiding her gaze. "I can't, Arya. Just, don't follow me." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the garden, the echoes of their shared moment fading into the night. Chapter 3. The morning after that unforgettable night in the garden, Arya woke up feeling strangely cold, her mind racing with blurry memories. She could still feel Lucas's touch, his lips on hers, the way he held her as if she was the only person who mattered. But as she turned and looked around her empty room, reality hit her. Lucas wasn't there. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her, hoping she might find him somewhere in the house. Her heart ached, but she told herself he must have had a reason to leave without saying anything. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. She dressed quickly and went downstairs, searching for him in every corner of the Harrington mansion. The library, the dining room, even the garden, they were all empty. It wasn't until later that she overheard Mrs. Harrington talking about how Lucas had left early for work, too busy preparing for his upcoming inauguration as CEO to bother with anything else. That's when it hit her, he wasn't coming back. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas's absence became harder to bear. Arya tried to move on, convincing herself it was just a one-time thing. But something felt wrong. She was tired all the time, her emotions swinging wildly. She couldn't focus on anything. Then, one morning, while cleaning her room, she noticed her calendar. Her heart stopped. She counted the weeks twice, then 3 times. She was late. Very late. Panic set in as she thought back to that night, her chest tightening with fear. Could it really be? No, it couldn't. But as the days went by, the nausea and fatigue became impossible to ignore. Finally, trembling with anxiety, she went to a clinic in town, praying she was wrong. But the doctor's words confirmed it. She was pregnant. Arya sat in the clinic room, her hand on her stomach, her mind spinning. Lucas's child. She was carrying Lucas's child. Her emotions clashed, fear, confusion, and a small, unexpected flicker of happiness. But the fear won. What would the Harringtons say? What would Lucas say? Weeks later, Lucas's inauguration finally arrived. The Harringtons insisted Arya come along, even though she felt out of place among the glitz and glamour of the event. She wore a simple dress, careful to hide her growing bump. She felt invisible in the grand ballroom, surrounded by powerful businesspeople and media. But when Lucas stepped onto the stage to deliver his speech, all her worries melted into the background. There he was, standing tall and confident, every inch the perfect CEO. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, and his deep voice commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Arya's heart skipped as she watched him, her emotions swirling. This was the man she loved, the father of her child, yet he was so far away now, unreachable. After the speech, she knew she had to talk to him. She had to tell him about the baby, even if he didn't want to hear it. She waited until he was alone in a quiet hallway, away from the crowd. Lucas, she called softly, her voice trembling. He turned, his eyes hardening when he saw her. What are you doing here, Arya? He asked coldly. Arya took a deep breath, her heart pounding. I need to talk to you, she said, stepping closer. Lucas's jaw tightened. If this is about that night, I don't want to hear it, he snapped. It's not just about that night, she said quickly, trying to explain, but he cut her off. Stop it, Arya, he said, his tone sharp and unforgiving. Whatever you're feeling, it's over. It never should have happened. Grow up. You're embarrassing yourself. The words hit her like a slap. Her throat tightened, and tears pricked her eyes. Lucas, please. But before she could finish, a voice interrupted them. Lucas, darling, there you are. Both of them turned to see a stunning blonde woman walking toward them. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her designer dress clung to her like it was made just for her. She smiled sweetly at Lucas but gave Arya a cold, calculating look. Who's this? The woman asked, her voice dripping with condescension. Lucas sighed, his face unreadable. Sophia, this is Arya, he said flatly. Then, turning to Arya, he added, Sophia is my fiancé. Arya felt her world crumble. The air seemed to leave her lungs, and she struggled to stay standing. Fiancé? She stared at Lucas, hoping he would say something, anything, to make it make sense. But he just looked away. Sophia's lips curled into a smug smile as she looked Arya up and down. Oh, the charity case, she said with a laugh. I've heard so much about you. Arya's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sophia turned back to Lucas, tugging on his arm. Let's go, darling. These parties are exhausting. Lucas glanced at Arya one last time, his expression unreadable, before letting Sophia pull him away. As soon as they were gone, Arya's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her stomach, the weight of everything crashing down on her. I was going to tell you, she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. You had a right to know. But now, it didn't matter. Lucas had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. And with Sophia by his side, there was no place for her or her baby in his life. That night, Arya made her decision. She packed her belongings quietly, not wanting anyone to stop her. She knew she couldn't stay in the Harrington household anymore. She needed to leave, to start fresh somewhere else. The next morning, before anyone was awake, she slipped out of the mansion with a small suitcase in hand. As she climbed into the waiting taxi, she placed a protective hand over her stomach. "I'll take care of you," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I promise." From a distance, Lucas watched as the taxi pulled away. He stood by the window, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't know why her leaving bothered him so much, but it did. Sophia appeared behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Forget about her, Lucas," she said lightly. "She doesn't matter." Lucas nodded, forcing himself to agree. But as he turned away from the window, he couldn't shake the feeling that he just made the biggest mistake of his life. Chapter 4. The small apartment was alive with noise. The twins, Emma and Ethan, were up and chattering away as Arya hurried around the tiny kitchen. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the worn but clean furniture in their home. Drawings were taped to the walls, Ethan's messy stick figures and Emma's colorful animals. Arya smiled as she poured cereal into bowls. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, though. Her alarm had buzzed hours ago, reminding her that today wasn't just any day. It was the start of her new job. She glanced at the calendar on the fridge where she had scribbled, "First day at work." She let out a soft sigh, shaking off the nerves. This job was important. It meant a better future for her children, even if it meant stepping into unfamiliar and intimidating territory. "Mommy, can I take this to school?" Emma held up a drawing of a rainbow with tiny flowers underneath. Her big brown eyes sparkled, and Arya's heart melted. "Of course, sweetie," Arya said, brushing Emma's hair out of her face. Ethan tugged on her arm, his expression worried. "Do you have to go to work today, Mommy?" he asked softly. Arya knelt down to his level, pulling him into a hug. "Yes, baby, but I'll be back before you know it. You'll have fun at school, and when you come home, we'll have dinner together. Okay?" He nodded reluctantly, holding on to her for a moment longer before letting go. The towering glass building loomed over Arya as she stepped out of the bus. She clutched her resume tightly, her palms sweaty. People in sharp suits and shiny shoes rushed past her, their confidence making her feel small. She took a deep breath and walked into the lobby of Harrington Enterprises. The space was massive, with marble floors and high ceilings. A large logo on the wall read Harrington Enterprises in bold letters. Her chest tightened when she saw it. The name felt like a ghost from her past, but she shook her head and reminded herself it didn't mean anything. She met with HR, trying her best to stay calm during the orientation. The woman leading the session was kind, but Arya still felt out of place. She listened carefully, nodding at everything, and tried not to let her nerves show. When they finally led her to her desk, she noticed a mission statement engraved on the wall. Her stomach twisted when she saw the name Lucas Harrington. It brought back too many memories, but she brushed it off. Surely Lucas had nothing to do with this job. The company was big, and she hadn't seen or heard from him in years. By the time Arya got home that evening, she was drained. Her feet ached, and her head was spinning from everything she had learned on her first day. But as soon as she opened the door, Emma and Ethan ran to her with big smiles and stories from school. "Mommy, look what I made!" Emma held up another drawing, this time of a son and two kids holding hands. "That's me and Ethan. And this is my spelling test," Ethan added, holding up a paper with a big red star on top. Arya laughed, pulling them both into a hug. "You two are amazing," she said, her exhaustion melting away for a moment. Later, after the twins were tucked into bed, Arya sat at the small kitchen table. Bills were scattered in front of her, and she sighed as she counted the money in her wallet. It wasn't enough. It never was. Her eyes drifted to her wallet, where a small photo peeked out. She hesitated before pulling it out. It was a picture of Lucas, one she had kept hidden for years. Her fingers trembled as she stared at it. He looked just as she remembered, strong, confident, untouchable. A lump formed in her throat as she thought about the twins upstairs. Lucas didn't know they existed. And even if he did, would he care? Or would he reject them the same way he rejected her? She shoved the photo back into her wallet, tears streaming down her face. How would you even look at them, Lucas? She whispered. Would you love them? Or would you push them away, like you pushed me? She wiped her tears, straightening her back. She couldn't think like this. She had to be strong for Emma and Ethan. They were her world now, and she would do whatever it took to protect them. They don't need you, she said quietly, even though her heart ached. We're fine without you. The next morning, Arya was making pancakes when Emma asked, Mommy, why don't we have a daddy like the other kids? The question caught Arya off guard. Her breath caught in her throat, but she forced a smile. Because we have each other, she said gently. And that's more than enough. Ethan looked up from his plate. But if we did have a daddy, what would he be like? Arya's chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. He'd be strong and smart, just like you, Ethan, she said, ruffling his hair. But let's not worry about that, okay? Now, finish your pancakes before they get cold. As Arya stepped into the building for her second day at work, her mind was racing. The possibility of running into Lucas was too much to handle. She kept telling herself it was unlikely. He probably had nothing to do with the day-to-day operations of the company. But the fear lingered. What if he saw her? Would he recognize her? Would he see the twins in her eyes? The thought made her stomach churn. He can't know, she whispered to herself as she stepped into the elevator. It's better this way. Unbeknownst to Arya, Lucas was already back in the office. He was focused on a major deal, his name buzzing through the halls of Harrington Enterprises. Everyone spoke about him with reverence, but Arya remained oblivious. A secretary mentioned to Lucas that a new employee had started, but he barely acknowledged it. Handle it, he said dismissively, his mind elsewhere. As Arya walked through the halls, Lucas was just a few floors above her. Their paths were on a collision course, but neither of them knew it yet. Chapter 5. Arya stepped into the towering building of Harrington Enterprises, her shoulders stiff with nerves. The second day of her new job had begun, and though her heart raced, she focused on looking confident. Dressed in a simple white blouse and pencil skirt, she clutched her bag tightly. She had prepared herself to face the challenges ahead, though one thought remained buried in her mind, Lucas. The halls were bustling with professionals moving with purpose, their chatter a low hum. Arya felt like an outsider among them, but she pushed the thought away. She was here to do her job, to provide for Emma and Ethan, not to dwell on the past or worry about who might walk past her. As she reached her department, Arya smiled politely at her colleagues, trying to seem composed. Her thoughts focused on the tasks for the day, and she convinced herself for the 100th time that Lucas Harrington wouldn't be anywhere near her. The company was too big. He wouldn't know she was here. Several floors above, Lucas entered the office with his usual commanding presence. His tailored suit fit perfectly, and the sharp sound of his shoes against the marble floors announced his arrival. His assistant hurried to his side, listing his schedule for the day. Lucas walked toward his office, his mind already racing with tasks. He barely paid attention until a name made him stop in his tracks. Arya Roberts, the assistant said. She's a new hire in one of the departments. Say that again, Lucas interrupted, his voice dangerously low. The assistant blinked, startled. Aria Roberts. She started yesterday. Should I bring her to my office? Lucas growled, his tone leaving no room for argument. The assistant nodded quickly and left. Lucas strode into his office, slamming the door behind him. He leaned on his desk, breathing hard. After all these years, she was here? Working for his company? Memories of her flooded his mind, her smile, her laughter, the night they'd spent in the garden, and the pain of her disappearance. Why now? He muttered, his fists clenching. Aria was confused when she was summoned to the CEO's office. She tried to focus on her work, but now she was being called upstairs without explanation. Her heart sank as she followed the receptionist toward the elevator. She stepped out into a sleek, quiet hallway, each step echoing loudly. The receptionist opened the grand doors, and Aria walked inside. Her breath caught as her eyes landed on him. Lucas Harrington. He was seated behind a massive desk, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers the moment she entered. Aria, he said, his voice low and cold. Aria froze, unable to move. It was like time had stopped. She hadn't prepared for this moment. Seeing him again after 6 years sent a wave of emotions crashing over her, fear, anger, regret, and something she didn't want to name. Lucas stood abruptly, his tall frame towering over her. His expression was a mix of fury and disbelief. What are you doing here? He demanded, his voice sharp and unyielding. Did you think you could waltz into my company and I wouldn't notice? Aria straightened her back, forcing herself to stay calm. I'm here for a job, Lucas. Nothing more, she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Lucas laughed bitterly, stepping closer. A job? Don't play innocent with me, Aria. You disappeared without a word, and now you're here, working for me? What's your game? She glared at him, anger bubbling beneath the surface. I didn't even know this was your company. Believe it or not, the world doesn't revolve around you. Lucas narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. So, you just happened to end up here? Coincidence, right? Yes, it is, she said firmly, meeting his gaze. I'm not here to manipulate you, Lucas. I'm here to provide for my family. The word family made Lucas falter for a split second, confusion flashing across his face. But he quickly masked it with anger. Your lies won't work on me, he snapped. Lucas moved closer, and Aria instinctively stepped back until her back hit the wall. His presence was overwhelming, his anger filling the room like a storm. He placed a hand on the wall beside her, trapping her. Why did you leave, Aria? He demanded, his voice low but filled with frustration. After everything, why didn't you stay? Aria swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to spill over. Because you made it clear I wasn't wanted, Lucas. You pushed me away. The tension between them crackled like electricity. For a brief moment, Lucas' eyes softened, betraying the anger he was trying to hold on to. I didn't, he started, but then he shook his head, stepping back slightly. You don't get to play the victim, he said harshly, though his voice lacked conviction. You should have fought harder if you wanted to stay. Aria's eyes flashed with anger. I shouldn't have had to fight for you to care, Lucas. I was nothing to you, and you made sure I knew it. Lucas stared at her, his jaw clenched, his emotions warring beneath the surface. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. Lucas turned away, running a hand through his hair. Stay out of my way, Aria, he said coldly, though his tone was tinged with something deeper. You won't get what you're looking for here. Aria's fists clenched as she glared at his back. I'm not here for you, Lucas. I'm here for me. And nothing you say will change that. She left the office, her head held high even as tears threatened to spill. Her mind raced with the confrontation, and she knew this wasn't the end. Left alone, Lucas slammed his fist on the desk, his frustration boiling over. Seeing her again had stirred emotions he thought he'd buried. He couldn't ignore the fire she still ignited in him, no matter how much he wanted to. Back at her desk, Arya sat down, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She placed a hand on her stomach, the memory of her pregnancy flashing through her mind. "You'll never know the truth," she whispered to herself. "I won't let you hurt them." From his office window, Lucas looked down at the employees below, his eyes locking onto Arya. His expression was unreadable, but his fists remained clenched at his sides. A storm was brewing, and neither of them could stop it now. Chapter 6. The office was quiet, the usual buzz of phones and voices replaced by the hum of the air conditioning. It was late, and Arya sat at her desk, the light of her computer screen glowing softly in the dim room. She was tired, her eyes heavy, but she couldn't leave yet. Reports needed finishing, and she didn't want to fall behind. She glanced at the clock on her screen, 9:45 p.m. Her heart ached at the thought of Emma and Ethan already asleep, waiting for her to come home. Just a little longer, she whispered to herself, typing quickly to finish the last page. The sound of footsteps startled her. She paused, glancing around. The office was supposed to be empty, but someone was there. The footsteps grew louder, steady and purposeful. Her heart quickened. Then, he appeared. "Still here?" Lucas' deep voice broke the silence, startling her. Arya froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Slowly, she looked up. Lucas stood a few feet away, his tall frame imposing in the dim light. His sharp suit clung perfectly to his broad shoulders, and his piercing blue eyes locked onto hers. "Just finishing up," she said softly, her voice wavering. Lucas didn't move, his gaze intense. "You work too hard," he said, leaning casually against the desk next to hers. His tone was softer now, but there was something in his voice that made her uneasy. Arya straightened, her defenses rising. "Why do you care, Lucas? Shouldn't you be in your office, pretending I don't exist?" Lucas smirked, pushing off the desk and stepping closer. "I can't pretend when you're right here, Arya. You think I don't notice you? You think I've forgotten?" Her heart pounded in her chest. Anger flared in her eyes as she stood to face him. "You have no right to say that. You've done nothing but push me away." Lucas closed the distance between them, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I've tried to forget you, Arya. I've tried to hate you, but I can't." "Lucas, stop," she warned, her voice trembling. She stepped back, but he followed, his presence overwhelming her. "I won't stop," he said, his eyes burning with emotions he couldn't hold back. Before she could respond, Lucas reached for her. His hands cupped her face, and he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or soft. It was desperate, filled with years of frustration and longing. Arya froze, her mind racing. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to push him away, but he didn't move. His lips claimed hers, demanding and relentless. Finally, she pulled back, her breathing uneven. "We can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "This is wrong, Lucas." But Lucas didn't let her go. His forehead rested against hers, his hands sliding down to her waist. "I don't care," he whispered. "I can't stay away from you, Arya." He kissed her again, this time softer but no less intense. For a moment, she let herself sink into it, her heart betraying her. But then the sound of a door opening shattered the moment. "Lucas?" Arya and Lucas broke apart, turning toward the voice. Margaret Harrington stood in the doorway, her face pale with shock. "What is going on here?" Margaret's voice was sharp, trembling with anger. Lucas stepped in front of Arya instinctively, his jaw tight. "Mother," he said calmly, though his voice carried an edge. Margaret's eyes darted between them, landing on Arya. "Arya," she said, her voice rising. "After all these years?" "And you," her gaze shifted to Lucas, her horror deepening. "You were kissing her? What on earth are you two doing?" Arya stumbled back, her face burning with shame. "Mrs. Harrington, I..." "Don't," Margaret snapped, cutting her off. Her voice cracked as she continued, "You're like siblings. Do you have any idea what this looks like? What this could do to our family?" Margaret pointed a trembling finger at Lucas, her face red with anger. "You're the CEO of this company, Lucas. If anyone finds out about this, it could destroy your reputation. Your career will be over." Then she turned to Arya, her voice venomous. "And you. I brought you into this family. Is this how you repay us? By seducing him?" Arya's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "It's not like that," she said desperately. "I never meant for this to happen." Lucas stepped forward, his voice firm and protective. "Don't talk to her like that," he said, his eyes blazing with anger. Margaret turned on him, her voice sharp. "You're risking everything, Lucas. If this gets out, it won't just ruin you. It'll destroy this family. Do you understand that?" Lucas squared his shoulders, his jaw clenched. "I don't care what people think, Mother. I won't let you or anyone else dictate my life." Arya grabbed Lucas' arm, her voice breaking. "Please, Lucas. Let me go. She's right. This can't happen. We'll only hurt each other." Lucas turned to her, his expression softening. "I can't let you go, Arya," he said quietly. "Not again. I'll protect you, no matter what." Margaret glared at them, her face hard with anger. "You're making a mistake, Lucas," she said coldly. "And you'll regret it." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The silence in the room was deafening. Arya stepped away from Lucas, her arms wrapped around herself. "You don't understand what you're doing," she whispered. Lucas reached for her, but she stepped back, shaking her head. "I can't let you ruin everything for me. For you. For them." Lucas' eyes darkened with determination. "I don't care what anyone thinks, Arya. I'll handle my mother, the company, the world if I have to. I won't lose you again." Later that night, Arya sat by the window in her small apartment, staring into the darkness. Her heart was heavy with guilt and confusion. She touched her lips, still tingling from Lucas' kiss, and wondered how she'd ever untangle herself from this forbidden connection. Meanwhile, Lucas sat in his office, staring out the window. His mother's words echoed in his mind, but he pushed them aside. His jaw tightened as he vowed to fight for Arya, no matter what it cost. Chapter 7. Lucas Harrington didn't know what to make of the sight before him. Standing in the lobby that morning, he watched through the glass doors as Arya crouched down to hug two small children. A boy and a girl. His heart skipped a beat. He couldn't stop staring, his gaze fixed on the twins. The girl had soft brown curls framing her face, and the boy, those piercing blue eyes. His eyes. The boy looked up at Arya with a familiar seriousness that made Lucas' chest tighten. They laughed as she kissed them goodbye, their small hands clinging to hers before a caregiver walked them away. Lucas' fists clenched. He stepped back into the shadows, his jaw tightening. His mind raced, his breath uneven. Who are they? His gut twisted with an answer he didn't want to confront. The day dragged on like a storm cloud over Lucas' head. He couldn't focus. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the twins, the girl's bright smile, the boy's quiet intensity. He spent hours analyzing Aria's every move. The way she avoided personal conversations, the urgency with which she left work each day. His suspicion grew into certainty, each thought a puzzle piece clicking into place. By the end of the day, he couldn't hold back anymore. That evening, the office was nearly empty when Lucas stormed into Aria's office. He didn't knock. He didn't warn her. He simply opened the door, his presence flooding the room like a tidal wave. "Lucas?" Aria's startled voice broke the silence as she looked up from her desk. His jaw tightened as he shut the door behind him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and commanding. Aria swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "I'm busy," she replied, trying to sound firm, though her voice wavered. "No," he snapped, stepping closer. "Not later. Now." She stood, her hands trembling slightly as she faced him. "What is this about?" "Those kids I saw with you this morning, who are they?" His tone was sharp, cutting through her composure. Aria stiffened, her heart hammering in her chest. "They're none of your business." Lucas' eyes darkened, his suspicion hardening into something fiercer. "Don't lie to me, Aria. I saw them. The boy, he has my eyes. The girl, she looks just like..." He stopped himself, his voice breaking with barely contained fury. Aria shook her head, her voice trembling. "Lucas, please." His voice rose, the frustration boiling over. "Don't do this. Tell me the truth. Are they mine?" Aria's chest felt tight, the walls closing in. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, his face so filled with anger and something else, betrayal. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They're yours." The room fell into silence. Lucas staggered back, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. His breathing was uneven, his hands clenching at his sides. "You kept them from me?" he growled, his voice trembling with rage. Aria shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I had no choice, Lucas. You didn't want me. You made it clear there was no place for us in your life. What was I supposed to do?" "You had no right," he hissed, stepping toward her. His movements were quick, almost predatory. "No right to decide that for me." He grabbed her by the arms, his grip firm but not painful, and pulled her closer. His face was just inches from hers, his breath warm against her skin. "You hid my children from me," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You lied to me." Before she could respond, his lips crashed against hers. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. His kiss was raw, filled with anger, pain, and longing. His hands moved to her face, holding her firmly as if he was afraid she'd disappear again. Aria froze, her mind reeling. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to push him away, but Lucas didn't budge. His lips were relentless, demanding a response. And then, something inside her broke. Her resistance melted, and she kissed him back with equal intensity. Her fingers curled into his shirt, holding on to him as if he were the only solid thing in the world. His hand slid down to her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The kiss deepened, their breaths mingling as years of unresolved tension exploded in a fiery storm. When they finally pulled apart, their faces were inches apart, their breaths ragged. "You don't get to shut me out anymore," Lucas whispered, his voice raw. "Not now. Not ever." Lucas stepped back, his chest heaving. His anger began to shift, guilt washing over him in waves. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room as he tried to process what he just learned. "They're mine," he said softly, more to himself than to Aria. "Emma and Ethan. They're my children." Aria nodded, her voice trembling. Yes. They're yours. Lucas turned to her, his blue eyes filled with a mix of emotions, pain, regret, and something deeper. Do they even know about me? He asked, his voice breaking. Arya shook her head. I never told them. I didn't want them to grow up feeling rejected. I didn't want them to know you didn't want us. His expression hardened, guilt replaced by determination. That ends now, he said firmly. I'm their father, and I'm going to be part of their lives, whether you like it or not. The next day, Lucas insisted on meeting the twins. Arya hesitated but agreed. They met at a quiet park, away from prying eyes. When Emma and Ethan saw Lucas, they were curious but cautious. Who's he, Mommy? Emma asked, her wide brown eyes studying him. Lucas knelt down, his voice soft. I'm someone very important, Emma. Someone who's going to be around a lot from now on. Ethan, quieter than his sister, eyed Lucas warily but relaxed when Lucas handed him a small toy car. I thought you might like this, he said. Ethan's lips curled into a small smile. Thank you, he murmured. Lucas spent hours with them that day, marveling at the way Emma's laughter mirrored his own, how Ethan's quiet intensity felt so familiar. He couldn't stop smiling as he watched them play, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't put into words. That night, as Lucas sat alone in his office, he stared at a photo he'd taken of Emma and Ethan during their outing. His jaw tightened as he made a silent vow. I'll protect them, he whispered to himself. No matter what it takes. Back at her apartment, Arya sat by the window, her heart heavy with worry. She touched her lips, still tingling from Lucas' kiss, and whispered into the darkness, this can't last. If they find out, everything will fall apart. Chapter 8. Sophia sat in the back seat of her chauffeured car, her eyes fixed on her phone. Lucas had been pulling away from her for weeks now, and she could no longer ignore the nagging feeling in her chest. She hated it, the doubt, the insecurity. She wasn't used to being second to anyone, especially not to Arya Roberts, the woman Lucas had once called his adoptive sister. But she wasn't stupid. She saw the way Lucas' expression changed whenever Arya's name came up. He was softer, distracted, as if he were somewhere else entirely. Sophia's hand clenched her phone tightly. She wouldn't stand for it. When Lucas claimed he had to work late again, Sophia decided it was time to find out the truth for herself. She ordered the driver to take her to his office, but instead of finding Lucas, she found him leaving, a soft smile on his lips, a rare expression she hadn't seen directed at her in months. Curious and furious, she told the driver to follow him. What she saw left her breathless with rage. Lucas was in a park. The soft afternoon sunlight dappled through the trees as he crouched down beside two small children, a boy and a girl. The girl giggled as Lucas handed her a flower, and the boy clutched a small toy car that Lucas had clearly given him. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched from a distance. The children were unmistakable. The boy had Lucas' piercing blue eyes and serious expression, while the girl's soft brown curls mirrored his own mother's. There was no doubt in her mind they were Lucas' children. Her grip tightened on the car door handle. So this was why he'd been so distant. He was sneaking around, playing house with Arya and these children. Her mind reeled. She couldn't believe it, but at the same time everything suddenly made sense. Sophia's lips curled into a bitter smile. If Lucas thought he could humiliate her like this, he was wrong. She wasn't the kind of woman to sit quietly while her fiancé played family with another woman. That night, Sophia's plan began to take shape. She reached out to key members of the Harrington Enterprises board, planting the seeds of scandal. She told them just enough to spark outrage, that Lucas was involved in a forbidden relationship with his former adoptive sister and that they had children together. The rumors spread like wildfire. Sophia didn't stop there. She made sure to subtly imply that Lucas' actions could tarnish the company's reputation, using her charm to position herself as the voice of reason in an otherwise chaotic situation. By the time the board summoned Lucas to an emergency meeting, Sophia sat back with a satisfied smirk. She'd set the stage. Now it was time to watch it all unfold. Lucas entered the boardroom with his head held high. The tension in the room was palpable as the board members sat with grim expressions. Margaret Harrington was there, her face cold and unreadable as she sat at the head of the table. The chairman cleared his throat. Lucas, we've received troubling information regarding your personal life. Is it true that you're involved with Aria Roberts? Lucas' jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. His piercing gaze swept over the room. Whatever you've heard is none of your concern. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company. The murmurs began immediately, but the chairman raised a hand to silence them. It's more than personal, Lucas. Rumors are circulating that you have 2 children with her. Do you deny it? Lucas leaned forward, his voice sharp. I don't owe you an explanation about my family. My children are not a scandal. They're mine, and I will protect them at any cost. Margaret's icy voice cut through the room. Lucas, this isn't just about you. This company is tied to our family's reputation. If this gets out, it could ruin everything we've built. Lucas turned to his mother, his eyes blazing. I won't apologize for loving my children. If you think I'll step down because of baseless rumors, you're mistaken. As Lucas stormed out of the boardroom, Sophia was waiting for Margaret in the hallway. Margaret, she said sweetly, her tone dripping with concern. We both want what's best for the company. Surely you see that Lucas' actions are reckless. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. He's out of control. We have to contain this before it destroys us. Sophia nodded, hiding her smirk. Exactly. We need to work together to protect the Harrington name. Later that night, Lucas arrived at Aria's apartment, his face tense with frustration. He didn't knock. He opened the door and stepped inside, startling her. Lucas? She asked, her voice filled with concern. What's wrong? He paced the room, his hand raking through his hair. The board knows about us. About the twins. Sophia made sure of that. Aria's face paled, her hands trembling. What does that mean? Are they going to fire you? Lucas stopped and faced her, his expression pained. They're threatening to force me out as CEO if the rumors escalate. I can handle the board, but Sophia and my mother are another story. They won't stop until they've torn us apart. Aria's eyes filled with tears. What are we supposed to do? We can't let them destroy everything. Lucas stepped closer, his hands gently gripping her arms. You and the twins are my world, Aria. But right now, you need to stay away from me. No, she said, shaking her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Lucas, no. We can face this together. His voice broke as he whispered, I can't risk them using you or the twins against me. If keeping my distance means keeping you safe, then I'll do it. But this isn't forever. Do you hear me? I'll fix this. Lucas pulled her into a desperate kiss. It wasn't soft or sweet, it was raw, filled with anguish and love. His hands tangled in her hair, holding her close as if she might disappear. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads rested together. I'll come back to you, he said, his voice trembling. I swear it. Left alone, Aria collapsed onto the couch, her tears soaking into the fabric. She held a photo of Emma and Ethan close, whispering, We'll get through this. Somehow. Back at his office, Lucas stared out the window, his fists clenched. He knew he was walking into a war, but he vowed to fight for Aria and their children, no matter the cost. Chapter 9. The quiet park felt calm and serene, a perfect setting for a meeting that was anything but. Margaret Harrington sat on a bench, her posture stiff, her expression neutral, but her thoughts a whirlwind. She had agreed to Lucas' request to meet the twins, but only out of obligation. She needed to see for herself if the rumors were true, if these children were really her sons. Lucas stood nearby, speaking softly to Arya, who hovered protectively near the twins. Arya's gaze flickered to Margaret now and then, her wariness evident. Margaret's eyes followed Lucas as he bent down to speak to the children, his tone light, his smile soft. It was a side of him she hadn't seen in years. And then, they turned toward her. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The little girl, Emma, skipped over to her, clutching a small piece of paper. Her soft brown curls bounced with each step, and her wide smile made Margaret's heart ache with something she couldn't name. The boy, Ethan, walked slower, his piercing blue eyes fixed on Margaret with a quiet intensity that unnerved her. "Are you Daddy's mommy?" Emma asked, holding out the paper. Margaret stared at her, speechless. She nodded stiffly, taking the paper with trembling fingers. It was a crayon drawing of a family, a man, a woman, and two children holding hands. "I drew this," Emma said proudly, pointing at the figures. "That's you." Margaret swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice quieter than she intended. Ethan approached next, holding a tiny flower in his small hand. He extended it toward her, his face serious. "For you," he said simply. Margaret's fingers trembled as she took the flower. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at the two children, so innocent, so full of life, and felt a crack in the icy wall she built around her heart. Margaret sat on the bench, the flower still clutched in her hand. She watched as the twins ran back to Arya, who crouched down to listen as they excitedly recounted their interaction with Margaret. Arya smiled at them, her love for them evident in every gesture, every word. For the first time, Margaret truly looked at Arya. She saw the weariness in her eyes, the quiet strength in the way she held herself. This was a woman who had faced the world alone, raising two children without help, without support. Margaret's resentment began to waver, replaced by a growing sense of guilt. That evening, back at the Harrington estate, Margaret sat alone in her study. The flower Ethan had given her rested on the desk in front of her. She stared at it, memories flooding her mind. She thought of Lucas as a boy, the way he'd looked at her with the same serious expression Ethan had. She thought of Emma's smile, so full of warmth and mischief. Her chest tightened as she realized how wrong she had been. These children weren't a threat, they were her grandchildren. And Arya. Arya had done what she thought was best, even when it meant enduring Margaret's coldness and judgment. The door opened, and Lucas stepped inside, his expression guarded. "What did you think?" he asked, his tone clipped. Margaret sighed heavily, setting the flower aside. "They're your children," she admitted. "There's no denying it. And I see now. I see what I didn't want to admit." Lucas crossed his arms, his frustration evident. "You judged Arya without knowing her struggles. You turned your back on her and on me." Margaret's voice wavered. "I was wrong, Lucas. I see that now. Those children, they're innocent. And Arya," she paused, her expression softening. "She's stronger than I gave her credit for." Lucas stared at her, his jaw tight. "They deserve better than this, Mother. They deserve a family that stands together." Margaret met his gaze, her eyes filled with resolve. "I want to help," she said quietly. "I want to protect this family, your family, from the board, from Sophia, from anyone who dares to threaten it." The next day, Margaret arrived unannounced at Arya's apartment. Arya opened the door, surprised and hesitant. Mrs. Harrington, she said cautiously. What are you doing here? Margaret stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the modest home. The space was small but warm, filled with toys and drawings. It was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Harrington estate, and it only deepened Margaret's guilt. I owe you an apology, Margaret began, her voice trembling. I misjudged you. I let my anger and pride blind me to what's truly important. Aria's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. Margaret continued, her tone softening. I see now how much you've sacrificed. You've raised those children with so much love, despite everything. And I was wrong to treat you the way I did. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as she reached for Aria's. You're part of this family, Aria. And I'll do everything I can to make up for the pain I caused you. Tears spilled down Aria's cheeks as she listened. I never wanted to hurt anyone, she said softly. I just wanted to protect my children. Margaret's voice broke as she said, You're not alone anymore. We'll face this together. She pulled Aria into an embrace, her arms tight around the younger woman. Aria sobbed against her shoulder, the weight of years of pain and loneliness finally lifting. Later that day, Margaret spent time with Emma and Ethan, laughing as they showed her their favorite toys and drawings. The icy walls she once kept up had melted, replaced by genuine affection for her grandchildren. When Lucas arrived, he found his mother sitting on the floor with the twins, a rare smile on her face. He exchanged a glance with Aria, their shared relief palpable. As the day ended, Margaret took Lucas aside. We have a fight ahead of us, she said firmly. But we'll win. For them. Chapter 10. Lucas sat in his office, the weight of the battle ahead heavy on his shoulders. Across the desk, Margaret leaned forward, her eyes sharp and determined. Between them lay the evidence they had painstakingly gathered, emails, messages, and financial records that painted a clear picture of Sophia's betrayal. She thought she could outmaneuver us, Margaret said, her voice steely. But this ends now. Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. I've let this go on long enough. Today, we take back control. Margaret placed a reassuring hand on his arm. I'll stand by you, Lucas. They won't stand a chance against us. Before leaving for the board meeting, Lucas stopped by Aria's office. She was sitting at her desk, sorting through papers, but the moment she saw him, she stood, sensing the tension in his demeanor. Are you ready? She asked softly. Lucas nodded, stepping closer. This isn't just about me, Aria. It's about you, Emma, and Ethan. I'll protect our family, no matter what it takes. Aria reached out, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened his tie. You've always been strong, Lucas. They'll see the truth, and they'll follow you. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing her cheeks as he stared into her eyes. You're my strength, Aria, he said quietly. This is for us. The boardroom was filled with tension as Lucas entered, his steps firm, his presence commanding. Margaret followed closely behind, her icy demeanor silencing the murmurs around the table. Sophia sat at the far end, her expression smug and confident, but Lucas didn't even glance at her. I've heard enough whispers, Lucas began, his voice sharp and unyielding. It's time to put an end to the lies. He placed a stack of documents on the table, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room. What you've heard are rumors planted by someone who has no regard for this company's integrity. But I've come prepared to show you the truth. He detailed the evidence, laying out Sophia's manipulations and deceit. Emails, financial transactions, and communication logs painted a damning picture. Sophia's smug expression faltered, and she finally snapped, This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything. Lucas didn't even flinch. The evidence speaks for itself, he said coldly. Margaret rose to her feet, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Sophia's actions don't just threaten my son, they threaten this company. She has no place here. The board members, once hesitant and unsure, now nodded in agreement. Sophia's desperation was evident as she stammered to defend herself, but it was too late. Lucas stood, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Let me make one thing clear," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Aria Roberts and my children are my family. Anyone who questions that, who dares to threaten them, will answer to me." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. No one dared challenge him. That evening, Lucas stood tall before a sea of cameras, Aria and the twins beside him. The press conference had drawn a crowd, and the tension was palpable. "There's been much speculation about my personal life," Lucas began, his voice steady and strong. "Let me make this clear, Aria Roberts is the woman I love, and Emma and Ethan are my children. They are my family, and I will protect them with everything I have." The crowd erupted into murmurs, but Lucas' unyielding stance silenced any doubts. Supportive applause broke out from employees and shareholders watching nearby, solidifying Lucas' position. After the press conference, Lucas whisked Aria away to a luxurious hotel suite, away from the chaos. The atmosphere was quiet, intimate, and charged with emotion. The moment they stepped inside, Lucas turned to her, his gaze heated. "It's over," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. "We're free." Aria clung to him, her fingers curling into his shirt. "I was so scared, Lucas," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I thought we'd lose everything." He cupped her face, his eyes burning with intensity. "We've won, Aria. Nothing will come between us again." He kissed her deeply, his hand sliding down to her waist as he pressed her against the wall. The kiss was raw, filled with passion and relief, their emotions spilling over after weeks of tension. Aria melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Lucas," she breathed, her voice breaking. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bed. Lucas laid Aria gently on the bed, his body hovering over hers as his lips never left hers. The kiss deepened, filled with hunger and desperation, as if all the moments they had been forced apart had built to this one explosive connection. His hands roamed her sides, slipping beneath the soft fabric of her blouse to feel the warmth of her skin. Aria gasped against his mouth, her back arching as his touch ignited something deep within her. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of emotions, love, longing, and surrender. "Aria," he murmured, his voice rough and strained. "I've missed you. I've needed you like this, completely mine." Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer as his lips moved down her neck, tracing a fiery path to her collarbone. She shivered beneath him, her breath hitching as his hands continued their journey, exploring her curves with a reverence that made her heart race. "Lucas," she breathed again, her voice breaking. He lifted his head, his gaze locking onto hers. His blue eyes burned with intensity, a storm of emotions swirling within them. "Tell me you're mine, Aria," he demanded softly, his hand cradling her cheek. "I need to hear you say it." She cupped his face, her own eyes glistening with tears. "I'm yours, Lucas," she whispered. "I've always been yours." Her words seemed to unleash something in him. His lips crashed onto hers again, his movements more urgent, more desperate. His hands made quick work of her blouse, tossing it aside as he worshipped her with his touch. He kissed every inch of exposed skin, his lips leaving a trail of fire down her neck, over her shoulders, and lower. Aria's hands found his shirt, trembling as she unbuttoned it, eager to feel the warmth of his skin against hers. When his shirt joined hers on the floor, Lucas pulled her against him, their bodies pressed together as if trying to erase the time and distance that had separated them. He whispered her name like a prayer, his voice filled with reverence and desire. Aria wrapped her arms around him, her breath catching as his lips found hers again. She surrendered to him completely, her heart and body trusting him in ways she had never trusted anyone else. the world outside their suite ceased to exist. It was just them, two souls reconnecting after years of heartache and longing. Every kiss, every touch, every whispered word was a promise, a commitment to a future they were determined to build together. Time stretched endlessly as they lost themselves in each other, their passion growing with every moment. When they finally reached the peak of their connection, it was like the world exploded in light and warmth, their hearts beating as one. Lucas collapsed beside her, pulling her into his arms. He kissed her forehead, his voice soft and full of love. "I'll never let you go again, Arya. You're mine, and I'm yours. Forever." Arya nestled against him, her hand resting over his heart. "Forever," she whispered, knowing that, for the first time, they truly had everything they needed, each other. The next morning, Lucas, Arya, and the twins moved into the Harrington estate. The once cold and imposing mansion was transformed by the laughter and energy of the children. Margaret welcomed them warmly, her demeanor softer than Arya had ever seen. She took Emma and Ethan by the hand, showing them around the house with genuine affection. Lucas and Arya stood together, watching the twins play in the garden. Lucas wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "This is just the beginning," he murmured. "We've built something they can't tear down." Arya leaned into him, her heart full. "We're finally a family," she said softly. The end.